would be interesting to also dwell on as you're saying, the problematics of this categorization, and I'm sure there will be problematics in any.
The way it impinges on our practices, especially art and archival practices, it becomes an issue of what are we exactly articulating when we're saying South Asia, and I think that's not clear, and I think it's that is been fluid for good reasons, but I think it also makes the same thing also makes it very inoperative. I think it becomes a sort of like a even in practice it becomes a thing that we sort of say to gain a certain kind of capital, or I don't know, it's just a lot of it is just performative, and I think it doesn't, I don't think we have a good and a clear articulation of what a regional South Asian identity means. I think even when you look at early 20th century, for example, if you look at Rabindranath Tagore, or that whole generation of practitioners, they actually had a much more clearer, nuanced, and potent articulation of not actually South Asia, but they were working with much more of a Pan-Asian kind of identity. And I think that was a much more, I think, viable and effective kind of thing than the South Asian one has been, honestly, in its sort of, I guess, I don't know how long it's lasted. Apart from that, I think there is also this issue that the South Asian identity actually hasn't been the invention of South Asians. you know, it's an invention very much of a mindset that comes from sort of the governance and this sort of military, regional area studies kind of mindset. And I think whenever you use the term, at some level, you are getting pulled into that kind of framing of the world. And I think people who want to think creatively and innovatively with the regional sort of identity, they do sort of. I know, sometimes you extend the border sometimes, to Afghanistan, sometimes even Iran. There are ways in which people have done it, including Tibet, and I think that invites a whole new set of problematics to deal with when you are toying with the original sort of conception. But I think the other issue that I think will never get addressed, I think it's also this unequal experience with colonialism of the various sort of areas of South, what counts as South Asia now. And so this issue again of what is the meta narrative, what is the story we're telling of the region, becomes difficult, because for Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, for instance, even Burma, if you're to include Burma in that category, the colonial experience becomes much more dominant in terms of what the identity and the experience of the region is. But once you go to Afghanistan, Tibet, Nepal, then I think the stories we want to tell as this is the story of the region changes a lot, and so I think it's something that even South Asian historians, professors and teachers who try to teach South Asian history struggle a lot with, and I think you see that in the way that Nepali historians, for example, are trying to say, this has been the experience of modernity in Nepal, let's say, have a much more harder time having an argument or a discussion with Indian historians, for example, or historians of India, because the desire and the need to tell a different sort of narrative makes much more sense here, because I think the question of colonialism has been much more different in places like Nepal, Tibet. So you see, I mean, I'm just trying to point out, there are all these things that actually impinges on, what is the usefulness of this category. But yeah, I mean, I think it's still a concept that can be mobilized in interesting ways.
That was very interesting to hear and to see articulated in that way. And I feel like even in the show, I mean, these problematics exist, but I guess the show is centered around a much more interpersonal identity and kind of relationships between practitioners. Um, I wanted to know how sort of Nepal Picture Library and how you respond to certain provocations from sort of these various places at which you're exhibiting or telling stories, and even I mean, you obviously had the larger exhibition about feminism, but then how certain narratives come out to fit in certain other narratives, and this is also happening all over in the region. So if you could respond to that.
Yeah. And I think there were two, not requirements, but I guess two targets, let's say, of Sorab's exhibition, the idea of the itinerary, or the traveling, and I think that when he talks about networks and communities, I think he's still coming from that place of an artist being an itinerant kind of thing, and I think that was, I think, for us an easier role to fulfill, as a sort of a curatorial demand that Sabi was making of all of us. Because yeah, I mean, I think we're dependent on those communities. We're friends at both personal and professional levels, and I think as an attempt to sort of speak as a community itself. That's, I think, one sort of, I guess, the idea for the exhibition, which was for us an easier one to be part of and fulfill. The other is, I think we always think about this, when we produce archives, we always consider our primary audience to be Nepalis, because, we're not necessarily just making art exhibitions. We're making exhibitions that seek to claim a certain legitimacy and authority to write and make history. And I think a lot of the times we're working with archives that haven't fully been acknowledged, or even accepted as archives. So I think we're working very much in the space of doing public history, right? Doing it in the name of public history, and of the public and for the public, which is Nepal. So given that, that is what motivates us, and that is what, the NPL, the entire all the projects that we do at NPL is about. It always becomes interesting when, other countries show interest in our work. I think a lot of, like, India, for example, has shown a lot of, Indian institutions have shown a lot of interest in displaying NPL's exhibitions, especially the feminist project we did. So I think when it travels, it's very interesting for us to also examine, like, what is it about those places that is sort of getting drawn to this project, and how can we sort of speak to it. We displayed a chapter of FMP in Singapore, and that was, for example, quite interesting for us, because the entire Feminist Memory Project exhibition was about protesting in some ways. It was about the culture of protest. It was about being on the streets, and
Right.
it was about how the feminist experience and the struggle here is intimately tied to the democratic struggle of this country, right? And to show that kind of work in Singapore, I think something else had to be articulated or brought out from the exhibition, which was really about. I mean, the reason why I said protest earlier was that I think when we showed it in Singapore, I think it became much more sort of framed around that idea about
Right.
protest cultures and what does it mean to live in a democratic space as opposed to a not undemocratic space. But the FMP itself had other potentialities, and I think when we showed it in Nepal, it was very much um, about sort of these of calling people into it, about how women both belong to public history, and also how public at large, right, is to be sort of what's that word, interpolated into a feminist history. So I think, so we that's how we think about it. I think Dubai, for us, I think the reason why I thought that the specific chapter of the underground communist women would make sense for Dubai is that, when I think of Dubai, or the Arab world, I think it's a place that has had, which we have completely forgotten, but it used to be a hotbed of leftist politics. It used to have these incredible, very, like, powerful communist parties, left movements. That's been completely obliterated. And I think if you look at the histories of these places, including Beirut or any other place, you'll find these, like, networks, communist networks, that has very deeply shaped those countries, or the 20th century experience of those places. So our hope was, I don't know. I mean, I thought that it would be interesting to tease out that history of those countries, because I think these are photographs that might exist in Arab households as well. Because
Right.
they have been part of political movements like the Communist Party here.
Mm.
I don't know who will come and see the exhibitions in Dubai, but for us, it's like, how can we think about Dubai, the audience in Dubai, and how they can relate
Mm.
to the material that we are putting out.